my dear sisters and brothers in Christ, I need to be plain with you about my feelings and let you know that I am reeling after Monday's events at St. John's Episcopal Church in Washington, D.C. And I am heartbroken after witnessing, like you, the murder of George Floyd on Memorial Day. And this compounded by the violence that has erupted out of that, it has shaken me to the point that I feel that it is my moral obligation to write to you. But I wanted to read my letter to you so that you could hear the tone of my voice and know that it is written with love and compassion for you and for the whole human family. But I need to be clear that I support nonviolent protests. I'm dismayed, though, when those protests are hijacked by a couple of bad actors and further violence ensues. I'm appalled at the militarization of our police and when unnecessary force is exercised by those who have sworn to protect. So this last Monday, there was a peaceful protest near St. John's Episcopal Church. Gathered there, though, were both clergy and members of that parish and some from a neighboring church to repair damages from a fire which was set the night before. They were also there to provide water and aid to those who had gathered for that peaceful, law-abiding protest in the adjacent park prior to the city's curfew. And in violation of normal protocol, police in riot gear descended upon the protesters, and then they cleared the church's property of all people, including the clergy and the parishioners of that church. Tear gas and rubber bullets were fired on those in the churchyard. And we learned that this excessive, this abusive act of power, and I believe a moral act, it was solely so that the president could produce a promotional video. And one of the priests who was expelled from St. John's is a friend of mine. Glenna Hubbard and I served in this diocese together until she was called to be rector of Church of the Epiphany in D.C., one of those neighboring churches. Now, the act that we saw on Monday is not only a clear violation of religious freedom, and I believe the separation of state from church, it is also a violation of the teachings of what is contained in the Bible and the sacred building that the president used as a political prop. Dietrich Bonhoeffer, a Lutheran pastor who was arrested and eventually executed by Adolf Hitler, he wrote this from his prison cell. He said, "The church is only the church when it exists for others, not dominating, but helping and serving. It must tell men of every calling what it means to live for Christ, to exist for others." So the president holding up that Bible after his brutal use of force, it's a mockery for all that that church stands for, all that our church stands for. Now, I've avoided partisan politics throughout the life of my ordination as a priest and the life of our community, as our allegiance is not to partisan politics, but to Christ alone. Our allegiance is not to partisan politics, but to Christ alone. And yet, the president, by violating sanctuary, the sanctuary of church from state, is now confusing the two. And by doing so, my conscience can no longer remain silent. So again, to quote Dietrich Bonhoeffer, he said, "Silence in the face of evil is itself evil, and that God will not hold us guiltless. Not to speak is to speak. Not to act is to act. This is not a political issue, This is a moral issue. This is not a political issue. This is a spiritual issue. You know, when we sponsor a child or someone else who is seeking baptism, we ask this question. The sponsors are asked this question. Do you renounce the evil powers of this world which corrupt and destroy the creatures of God? And our answer is, I renounce them. And while I will never name another human being as evil, I can name their actions as evil. And what I witnessed in the president's actions is an act of evil. And what we witnessed in the officers kneeling on the neck of George Floyd was an act of evil which destroyed a creature of God. And I renounce those acts. And I believe that we as a church community must renounce them as well and determine what our baptismal covenant requires us to do in this time and place. The baptismal covenant expresses the ways each of us will live our faith both inside and outside of the church walls. And two of the questions that were asked are, will you seek and serve Christ in all persons, loving your neighbor as yourself? And will you strive for justice and peace among all people, respecting the dignity of every human being? And to say, Black Lives Matter, is to say, I will, with God's help, to those questions. To say Black Lives Matter, it is to affirm the dignity of every human being. And now, we must simply strive for justice and peace for lives that too long in this society have not mattered. Last Sunday, the day before the events at St. John's, I said in my sermon on Pentecost, I said, we live in a world where words have become toxic, where powers and principalities threaten to divide and destroy us. If we don't learn the art of teaching, leading, and loving the world into how to be in one accord, we will burn ourselves down to ash. 2 years ago, we gathered in our parish hall and we developed a bold statement, a vision statement in which we proclaimed that we are a visible hub for the community and we offer an ever-expanding embrace to everyone and provide leadership on issues facing our community. It is time that we live more fully into that vision. Each of us, myself, leadership, the vestry, the staff, we're all having to grapple with this situation and how to open dialogue and how Holy Comforter can affect meaningful change, change that is consistent with our values, our beliefs, and that baptismal covenant. And I believe that time to start is now. Again, Dietrich Bonhoeffer wrote, he said, we're not simply to bandage the wounds of the victims beneath the wheels of injustice. We are to drive a spoke into the wheel itself. And so how do we do that? Well, a short distance from our campus, just down the hill, is Edgewood United Methodist Church. It's an historically Black church whose congregation will celebrate their 125th anniversary this fall. And yet, we have no real relationship with them. And so I think it's time to get to know our neighbor. we can express our renunciation of the use of all violence. And I think we can call and write our elected officials and demand reform. You and I, we can bolster our support of programs and institutions that promote education in underserved communities. Programs like the Sutton Scholars or our very own Food for Thought. They both address the significant imbalance there. 2 years ago, we engaged in a congregational conversation about race and racism. It was hard, but it was good. And I remain proud of us for having those very challenging conversations. They need to continue, and they need to deepen, and they need to broaden, and they need to turn into meaningful action. But as always, those all need to be deeply rooted in love. Our presiding bishop wrote this last week. He said, "What America has seen in the past several days may leave us wondering what we can possibly do in this moment to be good Samaritans, to help heal our country, even the parts we don't know or like. But we have the answer. Now is the time for a national renewal of the ideals of human equality, liberty, and justice for all. Now is the time to commit to cherishing and respecting all lives and to honoring the dignity and infinite worth of every child of God. Now is the time for us to show in our words, in our actions, and in our lives what love really looks like. Be safe. Be well. Be at peace."